They were standing on my porch, calm voices, clipboards in hand, telling me I had to hand over my house keys. Not asking, telling. And in that exact moment, I realized this wasn't about rules or compliance anymore. It was about who thought. They owned me. So instead of arguing, instead of panicking, I did something they never expected. I changed the locks, and away keys don't work anymore. What nobody tells you about moments like that is how quiet they feel. No shouting, no dramatic music. Just a strange stillness where your brain is racing but your body is perfectly calm. I remember noticing tiny details that shouldn't have mattered, the way one of them kept tapping his pen against the clipboard. The way the other smiled like this was already done, already decided. That smile bothered me more than the demand itself. It was the smile of someone who had never been challenged. They said my name like they were doing me a favor, like we were on the same side. They talked about policy, community standards, temporary access, all words designed to sound harmless, reasonable. But none of those words explained why to people. I didn't invite were standing on my porch demanding the keys to my house. I didn't answer right away. I could feel them waiting for it, the nod, the sigh, the reach into my pocket. Compliance disguised as cooperation. That's when it hit me. If I handed over the keys, even temporarily, this wouldn't end. It would only expand.
Access.
Always does. I told them I needed time to review what they were asking. One of them laughed softly like that was cute. The other reminded me they'd be back. Not if, but when. And then they left, confident, relaxed, like the outcome was inevitable. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart finally catching up to my thoughts. I wasn't scared yet. I was offended, deeply, because there's something uniquely violating about someone assuming access to your home, your space, your safety. And the more I replayed that interaction, the clearer it became this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a test. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was anxious, but because I was thinking. Thinking about every HOA story I'd ever heard brushed off with, just follow the rules. Thinking about how often power gets mistaken for authority. Thinking about how many people give in simply because pushing back feels exhausting by morning. My decision was already made. I didn't call them, didn't email, I didn't ask permission. I called a locksmith instead. Not just any locksmith, someone who specialized in high-security residential systems. When he arrived and I explained what I wanted, he raised an eyebrow, but didn't question it. He'd seen this before. It's maybe not my exact situation, but the pattern. People realizing too late that access once given is almost never fully taken. Back, as the old locks came off, I felt a strange sense of relief. Each click and turn of the screwdriver felt like reclaiming something that had almost been taken without my consent. By the time the new system was installed, keys were obsolete. No metal, no copies. Just biometric access tied to me alone. When it was done, the technician showed me how it worked. I pressed my finger to the scanner. A soft beep. The door unlocked. Simple. Final. Personal. I remember standing there afterward, hands still resting, near the doorframe, realizing that I'd crossed a line in their eyes. And once you do that, there's no going back to being easy. They came back 2 days later. I saw them through the window before they knocked. Same clipboards, same posture, different energy. This time they expected resolution, closure. The moment where I'd apologize for the delay and hand over what they came for, the first thing one of them did was reach for the handle. He didn't knock yet. He didn't ask. He just tried the door, casual and automatic. When it didn't open, he frowned slightly and tried again. Harder. That's when the knock came, sharper than before. I waited. Probably felt that way to them, but because I wanted to be sure of myself. I walked up to the door slowly, pressed my finger to the scanner, and felt it unlock beneath my touch. I opened it just enough to speak. They launched straight into it. No greeting, no pleasantries. They told me they were there for the keys. I told them I didn't have any. One of them chuckled like he thought I was joking. I explained calmly that I'd upgraded my locks, that keys were no longer part of the system. The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. You could see the gears turning, trying to figure out how this fit into the script they'd prepared. They told me I couldn't do that. I asked them to show me where it said I couldn't. They talked about compliance again, about cooperation, about consequences. I asked them again what law I was breaking. Neither answered directly. That's when their tone shifted. The friendliness dropped. The smiles vanished. One of them stepped closer, invading that invisible boundary people rely on to intimidate without touching. He told me this would get complicated if I didn't cooperate. I told him my lawyer would be happy to discuss it with them. That stopped him cold. I closed the door gently, deliberately, and listened as the lock sealed itself behind it. I didn't rush away. Stood there, breathing, heart steady, listening to their muffled conversation outside. The frustration was obvious even through the door. They weren't used to this. They weren't used to being blocked. That evening, the first letter arrived. Official, looking firmly worded. Vague enough to be scary. Warned of violations without clearly stating any. It referenced policies without citing specifics. It was designed to unsettle, not inform. Over the next week, more followed. Each one escalating slightly in tone. Each one assuming I'd eventually crack. I didn't. I read them carefully, highlighted inconsistencies, and filed them away. Documentation became my quiet weapon. Neighbors started acting differently. Some avoided eye contact. Others asked vague questions, testing how much I'd say. A few quietly admitted they'd had similar experiences, but had given in because it was easier. I understood that instinct. Convenience is powerful. Fear even more so, but something had shifted in me. The moment I pressed my finger to that scanner for the first time, I'd made a choice not just about a lock, but about boundaries. And once you enforce one boundary successfully, it becomes much harder to ignore the next time someone tries to cross it. They came again, this time with more people, more authority in their posture, less patience in their voices. They wanted a confrontation. They wanted me flustered. They wanted proof that I was the problem. They didn't get it. I stayed calm, repeated the same facts, offered nothing extra. Told them all communication would go through legal channels. The more composed I was, the more unsettled they became. Power hates calm resistance, thrives on emotion, not steadiness. When they finally left, I realized something important. This wasn't just my fight anymore. Every letter, every visit, every subtle threat was part of a system that relied on people not pushing back, and whether I liked it or not. I was now a problem they had to deal with, and this was only the beginning. If you think this ends with a simple standoff, stay with me, because what happened next exposed just how far they were willing to go, and how quickly authority crumbles when someone refuses to play the role assigned to them. The next move didn't come with a knock, came quietly, folded into my mailbox like junk mail, disguised as routine. Another letter, it's thicker this time, heavier. The kind of envelope that's meant to feel important before you even open it. I remember holding it in my hand, feeling that familiar flicker of irritation mixed with curiosity.
Oh.
This was escalation. You don't increase paper unless you're trying to compensate for something that didn't work in person. Inside was a notice of violation. Vague, broad, accusatory, without being specific. It referenced sections and subsections, clauses that sounded official, but didn't actually say much. That's how they do it. They don't need to be right. They just need to sound confident enough that you assume they are. I sat at my kitchen table and read it 3 times. Slowly, then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was transparent. They were throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping something would stick. Landscaping, exterior modifications, failure to cooperate. That last one stood out. Not illegal, not prohibited. Just disobedient. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't about the locks anymore. This was about punishment. I called my lawyer that afternoon. Read him the letter word for word. Paused at the same line I had. Failure to cooperate, he repeated, amused. That's not a violation. That's an attitude problem. He told me to keep everything, to respond to nothing verbally, to let them keep making moves. People who think they're untouchable tend to overstep when they're frustrated, and they were definitely frustrated. Over the next 2 weeks, they showed up 3 more times, always during the day. Always when they thought I might not be home. They'd walk the perimeter of my house, clipboards out, whispering to each other like they were inspecting a crime scene. One of them took photos. Another measured something with a tape measure that didn't make sense. I watched from inside, phone recording, documenting every step. Neighbors noticed. That was part of the point. Suddenly people were asking questions. Not directly, never directly, but sideways. Everything okay with the HOA? Heard they've been by your place a lot? You must have really upset someone. That's how pressure spreads in these communities. It's not through force, but through reputation. To make someone look like a problem, and others will do the isolating for you. But something unexpected happened. One evening a neighbor knocked on my door. Older guy. Lived here longer than most. He didn't come in. Just stood on the porch and said quietly, "They did the same thing to me 5 years ago. I caved." He didn't say it with regret. He said it like a confession. He told me how it started small. Access requests, inspections, then fines. Then more rules that seemed to apply only to him. He paid them just to make it stop. It never really did. He nodded at my door. "Wish I'd done what you did." The conversation mattered more. Then all the letters combined, because it reminded me that what feels like a personal conflict is often just a recycled script. Same tactics, different target. The next letter came faster. This one mentioned potential fines. Numbers, deadlines, urgency. That familiar squeeze in the chest. Tried to creep in, but it didn't last. Because fear only works when you're guessing. And I wasn't guessing anymore. I was prepared. I responded through my lawyer. Short, precise, no emotion. We requested clarification, legal authority, specific statutes, proof of violations, not opinions, not interpretations. Facts. The silence after that was deafening. For nearly a week, nothing happened. No visits, no letters, no emails. It was unsettling. In a different way, when someone who's been pushing suddenly stops, it's rarely because they've given up. It's because they're regrouping. They regrouped publicly. The notice went out to the entire community. A reminder about compliance, about standards, about cooperation with the board. It wasn't subtle, didn't mention me by name, but it didn't need to. Everyone knew who it was aimed at. That was the moment I understood how these things really work. They weren't trying to win an argument. They were trying to reassert dominance. To show everyone else what happens when someone says no. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I almost didn't go. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew it was a stage. A performance designed to put me under a spotlight. But avoiding it would have looked like guilt. And guilt is something they love to assign when they can't prove it. So I went. The room was packed, more than usual. People don't show up to HOA meetings unless there's drama. The board sat at the front, lined up like judges, familiar faces. Same clipboards. Same tight smiles. They opened with general updates. Budget talk. Landscaping. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then they moved to community concerns. That's when I felt it, that shift in the air when everyone knows what's coming. They started speaking in hypotheticals. If a homeowner were to refuse access, if someone were to install unapproved modifications, each sentence landed closer to my seat. Eyes flicked in my direction. Whispers rippled through the room. Finally, they said my address, not my name. My address. That's another trick. Dehumanize first. Make it about property, not people. They listed alleged violations. The locks. The refusal to comply. The obstruction. I waited until they finished. I stood up slowly, feeling every eye on me, and I did the one thing they didn't expect. I stayed calm. I asked them to show me the rule that required me to hand over my house keys. They couldn't. I asked them to cite the regulation prohibiting biometric locks. They danced around. I asked why access was being demanded without a warrant, order, or emergency. No clear answer. The more questions I asked, the less confident they sounded. Someone in the audience spoke up, then another. People asked about their own rights, about inspections, about access, about fines. The meeting started slipping away from them. That's when one of the board members snapped, raised his voice, accused me of being uncooperative and hostile. That word again, hostile, as if refusing to hand over keys was an act of aggression. I reminded him that hostility requires force. Boundaries do not. The room went quiet. They adjourned early. After that, things changed. Not immediately, but noticeably. The visits stopped. The letters slowed, the tone softened. Suddenly there were offers to work things out, to find a compromise. That's always how it goes when authority realizes it might actually be challenged. But compromise only matters when both sides were wrong, and I wasn't. Behind the scenes, my lawyer was filing requests, formal ones, records, past cases, patterns. And what we found was worse than I expected. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a habit repeated, quiet, effective, until it wasn't. And that's when they made their biggest mistake. They tried to force entry, not with me home, but with witnesses. That's where this story turns from tension into something else entirely. So stay with me, right? Because once you hear what they tried next and who they brought with them, you'll understand why this was never just about locks. It happened on a Tuesday morning. It's the kind of morning that feels forgettable until it isn't. I wasn't even supposed to be home. I'd stepped out, grabbed coffee, sat in my car scrolling on my phone longer than I should have. I'd left 5 minutes earlier. I would have missed everything. I saw the vehicles before I saw the people. 2 familiar cars, HOA, and one I didn't recognize at first, white. Unmarked, but official looking enough to make your stomach tighten. They were parked right in front of my house, like they belonged there. Like this was routine. I stayed in my car. From across the street, I watched them walk up my driveway. 4 of them this time. 2 board members I recognized immediately. 1 property manager. And a 4th man I'd never seen before, wearing a badge clipped to his belt. Not police. Something else. Private security, maybe. Or someone meant to look intimidating enough that no one would question why he was there. They didn't. Knock. That's what told me everything. The property manager pointed at my door. One of the board members nodded, and the man with the badge stepped forward and reached for the handle. I felt a jolt of cold clarity run through me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't an inspection request. This was an attempt. He tried the handle once. Then again, harder. He leaned his shoulder into it slightly, not enough to break anything, but enough to send a message. This is happening whether you like it or not. I got out of my car. I didn't rush. I didn't shout. I walked up my driveway slowly, phone already recording, heart pounding, but head clear. When they noticed me, the shift was immediate. You can tell when people realize they've crossed from confident into exposed. The man with the badge stepped back from the door like it had burned him. I asked them what they were doing. They talked over each other at first. Words like emergency, access, and authority and board directive flew out fast, tangled, inconsistent. That alone told me they weren't prepared to be questioned. They were prepared to be obeyed. I asked them to explain the emergency. No one could. I asked them to show me the document authorizing entry. They didn't have one. I asked why a private individual had attempted to open my door. That's when the property manager tried to take control. Told me I was escalating the situation. Told me I was overreacting. Told me this could all go away if I'd just cooperate. That word again. Cooperate. I told them calmly that they were trespassing, that the attempt to access my home without legal authority was being recorded, and that they needed to leave immediately. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I just stated facts. The man with the badge avoided my eyes. One of the board members tried to save face, said they were just checking something. I asked him what. He couldn't answer. Another neighbor had come outside by now. Then another. Curtains shifted. Phones came out. That's when they left. Not quickly. Not dramatically. just awkwardly, like people backing out of a room they weren't supposed to be in. But the damage was already done, because once people see authority hesitate, they start asking why. I went inside, locked the door, and sat down. That's when the adrenaline hit. My hands shook. Not from fear, but from anger. A deep, controlled anger that comes when someone shows you exactly who they are. I called my lawyer immediately. He didn't interrupt once while I explained what happened. I finished. He exhaled slowly and said, "That's it. They crossed the line." Within hours, he was drafting letters. It's not the vague kind they liked to send, the precise kind. The kind that cite statutes liability and personal accountability. The kind that make people stop smiling. The HOA responded the next day. Apologies, carefully worded. Phrases like miscommunication and procedural error. They assured me it wouldn't happen again. The policies would be reviewed. That they valued community. Trust. It would have been almost funny if it hadn't been so revealing. Because behind the scenes, things were unraveling. Neighbors started talking, not whispering talking. About inspections they felt pressured into. About fines that never made sense. About access demands that felt wrong but were easier to comply with than fight. Someone posted in the community group, carefully, neutrally, asking if the HOA was allowed to enter homes without permission. The comments exploded. The board went silent. Meetings were postponed. Emails went unanswered. The same people who once stood on my porch with clipboards suddenly didn't want to be seen. Power doesn't disappear quietly, but it does retreat. When the spotlight turns on, a week later, I received another letter. This one wasn't a threat. It was a notice that the alleged violations against my property had been resolved. No explanation, no apology, just gone. As if they'd never existed. That should have felt like a win. Instead, it felt like a warning. Because systems like this don't stop because they're wrong. They stop because they're exposed. Exposure makes people desperate. The next HOA meeting was packed. More packed than the last one. Standing room only. I sat near the back this time. I didn't need to be up front anymore. They opened with a statement about transparency, about listening, about learning. You could hear the strain in their voices. Every word felt rehearsed, fragile. Then the questions started. Not from me, from everyone else. People asked about access rights, about private security, about why fines were issued without clear violations, about records, about who approved what. Each question chipped away at the carefully maintained image of control. One board member resigned on the spot. Another announced they wouldn't be seeking re-election. The room buzzed, not angry awake. I sat there quietly, realizing something important. This was never about me being special or brave or stubborn. This was about timing, about being the one person who didn't hand over the keys when asked. Because once one person says no, it gives everyone else permission to question. After the meeting, people approached me, thanked me. Some quietly, some openly. A few admitted they were scared to speak up before. Others said they didn't even realize they could. That's when it really sank in. What I'd done wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was a boundary. Calm, firm, unmoving, and it had cracked something wide open. But the story wasn't over yet, because when power structures start collapsing, they don't go down without trying one. Last move. One final attempt to regain control, and the one they tried next wasn't subtle at all. If you think the lock was the end of it, stay with me. Because what happened after the exposure, after the resignations, after the apologies was the moment they realized they couldn't scare me anymore. That's when they tried something far more dangerous. By the time they made their final move, I could feel it coming. Not because they warned me, not because they announced anything, but because silence from people who are used to control is never Pazit's planning. The community had shifted. The board was fractured. Neighbors were talking openly now. When systems like that start losing grip, they don't suddenly become reasonable. They become reckless. The notice arrived on a Friday afternoon. This time, no certified mail, just a plain paper taped to my door, flapping slightly in the breeze like it wanted to be seen by anyone walking past. That alone told me everything. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about sending a message. It claimed my property was in immediate known compliance and scheduled a corrective action for the following Monday. corrective action. That phrase should chill you because it's deliberately vague. It's a catch-all. It's a way to imply authority without committing to specifics. It doesn't explain what they plan to do, only that they plan to do something and that they expect you to feel powerless about it. I didn't take it down right away. Let it hang there for a few hours. Long enough for neighbors to notice. It's long enough for phones to come out. Long enough for questions to start forming. Then I called my lawyer. He was quiet for a long moment after I read it to him. Then he said very calmly, "They're done." That Monday morning, I didn't leave the house. I made coffee, sat near the front window. I turned on the cameras. I waited. It showed up at exactly 9. Not for people this time. 6. 2 board members who hadn't resigned. The property manager. A different security guy. And 2 people I didn't recognize at all clipboard carriers. Clearly there to look official enough to justify whatever. Came next, they stood on my porch like a press conference. One of them read from a paper, announcing violations in a voice meant to carry. He didn't knock. He didn't ask me to come out. He spoke to the door like it was supposed to answer. I let him finish, and I opened the door. Finger to scanner. Soft click. Same sound that had started all of this. The sound that still made them visibly tense. I didn't step outside. I told them they were trespassing. They tried to talk over me. I held up my phone. I told them they were being recorded. Told them any further attempt to access my property would result in police involvement. Not as a threat, as a statement. One of the clipboard carriers tried to step forward anyway. That's when the first police car pulled up. Then a second. A neighbor had already called. The officers got out slowly, taking in the scene. Multiple HOA representatives, private security, crowd forming across the street. Cameras everywhere. The mood shifted instantly. Authority recognizes authority. And suddenly, the people who'd been acting untouchable were explaining themselves to someone who didn't care about HOA rules. The officers asked what was going on. Everyone started talking at once. That never helps. Eventually the story came out in fragments. Alleged violations. Corrective actions. Claimed authority to access the property. The officer turned to me and asked one simple question. "Did you give them permission to be here?" I said no. That was it. No debate. No interpretation. No clipboard could override that answer. The officers told them to leave. Immediately. Explain that any further attempt to access my home without consent or a court order would be treated as trespassing. One of the security guys argued briefly. The officers shut that down fast. They left in silence. No speeches, no smiles, no confidence, just retreat. The next few weeks were chaos behind closed doors. Emergency meetings, legal consultations, damage, control emails sent late at night. The board tried to regain credibility by promising reforms, audits, transparency. The same people who once demanded keys were now asking for trust. It didn't work. A special vote was called. Board members were removed. The property manager was terminated. Policies were rewritten. Access rules were clarified in plain language so no one could hide behind ambiguity again. And then something happened that I didn't expect at all. People thanked me. Not publicly. Not loudly. Quiet conversations, notes left in mailboxes, messages sent late at night. People telling me stories they'd never told anyone else. About intimidation, about fear, about how small they'd felt in their own homes. I listened, because that's the part no one talks about in HOA stories. The aftermath. The realization that control survives not because it's right, but because it's familiar. And familiarity keeps people silent. Months later, life settled back into something close. Too normal? No more letters. No more surprise visits. No more clipboards on my porch. The biometric lock stayed. Not because I was afraid, but because it reminded me of something important every time I used it. I never gave them my keys. And because of that, they never got anything else either. If you're watching this and thinking, I could never do that, I understand. I thought that too. Most people don't push back because they're weak. They don't push back because they're tired, busy, afraid of conflict, afraid of being labeled difficult. But here's the truth they don't want you to realize. Most power only exists because it's never questioned. The moment you ask for justification, it wobbles. The moment you demand clarity, it hesitates. The moment you enforce a boundary calmly and consistently, it panics. The story wasn't about locks. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't even about an HOA. It was about ownership. Not of property, but of yourself. So if someone ever stands on your porch with a clipboard and a smile telling you what you have to do, pause. Look past the words. Ask yourself the real question. Are they enforcing a rule? Or are they testing whether you'll hand over the keys to your life just because they asked? If this story resonated with you, don't just scroll away. Share it. Talk about it. Because the fastest way these systems lose power is when people realize they're not alone. And trust me, they're counting on you thinking you are.